thanks to Al-Sharq Forum for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum. When we talk about the energy development in a global context, and how much this means for the region, it means that this region really need to think its economic futures and options. Just to build on the two good points that made by Malik and Charles on the fast-moving advancement on the technology, and the fact that we are living in a world of ample supply of energy resources. This has put significant strain on producing countries, specifically the rentier states and the Middle East. We've seen various plans and visions, notably the Saudi Vision 2030, the UAE plans beyond oil, and various countries in action in terms of like putting forward their strategies to exit that dependency on oil. As Charles mentioned, oil will not be an obsolete commodity. Not at all. There will be a significant need and dependency on it, but may not necessarily stay as the primary source of fuel after 20 or 30 years. It will be competed by various sources of energies as technologies develops. And with these developments, it comes in not only new sources, but reduction of costs in terms of like the development. We've seen during the decline of oil prices in 2014, 15, and 16, that it did not significantly affect the US shale market. Although it kind of like declined marginally, but most of the industry nowadays proved to be, it could survive on $30 a barrel, while over 50% of the producing assets could easily break even on $22, $25 a barrel. Now, with regards to the Middle East, these countries really need to think their futures. We've seen, for example, there is a complete rethinking in terms of like institutional reform and economic reform. In Saudi Arabia, for example, since 2015, we saw the changes on the institutional side of it. For example, the mergers of the ministries of industries, oil, and electricity under one institution, the decoupling of the management side between Aramco and the regulatory side. Also the interest of the country to invest more and more on renewable, to free as much as not only to kind of like to comply with environmental and efficient energy use, but also to free as much liquid as possible to the market to secure maximum rent. From Abu Dhabi, we've seen the restructure of offshore, onshore assets and attracting more and more investments. Kuwait allocating over 112 billion barrels to expand their production capacity from 3 to 4 million, and also expanding downstream capacity to 1.5 billion. Also tapping into, alongside with Saudi Arabia, to tap into markets to secure maximum market share in Asia. In Iraq, we've seen a significant development in terms of the fiscal regimes, for example. In the northern part of Iraq, the Kurdistan region of Iraq adopted production sharing agreements with the IOCs. In the federal level, they adopted technical service agreement, but throughout the process, they moved into refining and better defining these model contracts to adopt reserves booking. And in the final bid rounds, just 2 weeks, about 10 days ago, they adopted a tax royalty system with revenue sharing, which is, it's kind of like quite challenging to define it as just a technical service agreement. and open up more for like sensitive assets, specifically the border fields, and attracting more and more investments. And also Iran, against all odds and the potential sanctions and so on, they are working day and night in attracting companies, specifically the Russians and the French companies, to invest in the oil and gas industry, awarding assets in a very difficult time after redefining and reinventing, in fact, the model contracts, the Iranian petroleum contracts, which is very much similar to the technical service agreements with more improvement. So there is a kind of like a sense of responsibility towards rethinking the future of those producing countries as where would they fit when it comes to the competition in 20, 30 years, especially when they read kind of like reports, for example, the International Energy Agency talking about the penetration of the electric vehicles into the transportation industry. Yes, the heavy transportation, the airlines and ships and so on will remain on kind of like the liquid fuel. But when it comes to the to overall transportation, 25% of the consumption of the oil depends on, goes into transportation. We could see the 1 billion cars of today with only 1 million penetration allocated for EV. It could lose at least a third over the next 20, 30 years to the electric vehicles market. Again, on the electric vehicle, there are other challenges in terms of like the supply of lithium batteries and the testing and the development of that industry. But once this market shrinks, it will, once the demand on oil shrinks, it will lead producers to really kind of like think their future when it comes to market share. It will be an aggressive, competitive market share, over market share. The reserves also, it's becoming more and more meaningless. We have, for example, in Iraq, 150 billion barrels worth of proven reserves on oil, significant reserves on gas. This could last us, based on current production plateau, over 110 years. But do we need to wait for a century to realize that the revenues of such commodity could sustain financing budgets? The answer is no. We need to work very hard over the next 20 years gradually to quit that dependency. Saudi Arabia most recently increased their reserves to 270. They face the same story. Bahrain is, based on the recent findings of 81 billion barrel of shale oil, nearly 14 trillion cubic feet of gas. Based on new technology, the US experience, I would say, it could secure them at least 10% of potential recovery of these assets. So the market will become more and more competitive, and we will see over the next few years, producers will find ways of identifying solutions. Now, when it comes to reforming economies, is going to be quite challenges. This goes closely tied to the social contract, to the political system of these countries, to redefining the institutions to be more and more democratic and liberal, and more responsible and accountable. The economic reform is not just a slogan or a statement to be kind of like said. It has to be implemented carefully, and it's a journey that could not be fulfilled in a year or two. It could last for a decade or two, and it's a gradual one. So, when we talk about the potential transformation that this region, the Middle East, could face, it will require not only a local economic reform at country level, but also at regional level. Eventually, we could see countries looking into the common interest between them, as opposed to isolating themselves to look into their local interest. The councils, regional councils such as the Arab League, such as the GCC, and their equals proved to be not as productive, if not a failure, by not securing the maximum need for economic interest at regional level. Maybe the region will require some sort of economic confederal union that looks into the interest of between regional countries on issues such as energy, water, security, and basically maximum return of trade and international relations with the global community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.